O'clock. I'd like to call the meeting to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Kelly, would you call the roll, please?
Michael DeVito.
Here.
James Shiloh.
Here.
Christian Koppel.
Here.
Beth Marie Evans. Here. Alex Grados.
Here.
Eric Jones.
Present.
Alan Zantu.
Present.
The quorum is present.
Good evening. As a reminder, our board governs by policy, which is aligned with state statute. It's essential that our practices reflect these policies, ensuring transparency, accountability, and effective governance. Only in a duly convened public meeting with a quorum present can the board govern as a whole. Where our practices and policies do not meet the current needs of the district, it is our responsibility to amend these policies where legally allowable to better serve our community and to align with our strategic plan. Our mission is to empower all learners to succeed in their world. Our vision is to provide an ideal learning experience where students and staff are engaged and want to come back the next day. Our board policies and actions should reflect that mission and vision. The next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the following consent agenda items? Minutes of regular meeting October 22nd, 2024. Minutes of executive session October 22nd, 2024. Minutes of special meeting November 12th, 2024. Financial reports. Bills payable. Personnel report, which could include employment, resignation, retirements, terminations, leaves of absence. The annual statement of affairs, and the disposal of equipment. So moved.
Seconded.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion related to the consent agenda?
Before we approve it, could we just get a brief walkthrough of the new report, financial report, since there's been so many changes, just to sort of make sure we all are on the same page of what things mean?
So,
Or would it be better if I pull it?
I think it would be better to pull it from the agenda, just so the motions, so the discussion's germane to the motion. But we can pull it, absolutely. Is there placement that you would like it?
Probably the sooner the better. I don't know. Wherever you see fit.
Are there specific questions about,
Yeah, yeah.
as opposed to like a
More
full
of a
review?
walkthrough, though.
What's that?
Just more of a brief walkthrough is what I'm looking for. If possible.
How about we put it just before the public hearing? How does that sound?
Sure.
Okay. All right, so we've pulled that item from consent. Is there a motion to approve the amended consent agenda as proposed?
So moved?
Seconded.
Seconded? All in favor? Or I'm sorry, roll call.
Jones.
Yes.
Zantu.
Yes.
Shiloh.
Yes.
Koppel.
Yes.
Evans. Yes. Grados.
Yes.
DeVito.
Yes.
Motion carried.
All right, the next item on the agenda is the NIA consent agenda. The recommended action is to approve the NIA consent agenda as presented. Is there a motion to approve the NIA consent agenda items, NIA treasurer's report, NIA bills payable, NIA personnel report, and NIA contract/vendor agreement reports?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion related to this? All right, roll call vote.
Zantu.
Yes.
Shiloh.
Yes.
Koppel.
Yes.
Evans. Yes. Grados.
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
DeVito.
Yes.
Motion carried.
All right, the newly amended agenda should reflect that the financial report is now listed. Is there a motion to approve the financial report as proposed?
So moved.
Second. Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion related to the financial report?
If we could just get a, sort of an overview as to what we're looking at now, since there's been so many changes, that would maybe help the board, just to ensure we're all on the same page as to what we're looking at and how we can read it.
Is there the ability to produce that information at a later date in the form of an email to the board? Would that be possible? Okay. What does the board think about allowing a little bit of time to produce a memorandum? Would that be acceptable, or would the board like to see that information sooner?
It'd be fine either way. I guess the reconciliation, since it's new, just sort of understanding what it is, I think would help the board and how to read it.
Would anyone else like to speak on the motion? Is there any other interest to see information at this meeting related to the financial reports? Seeing no additional interest, Alex, would it be acceptable if it came in the form of an email to the board?
Whichever's preferred, or email, verbal,
With some advance
sure,
preparation?
yeah. Whatever
Would that be okay?
administration prefers.
What if we do a memo after break?
Yeah,
Break starts
like, there's no
tonight.
rush. I mean, it looks good, I just, more, just no reason. There's been so many formatting changes.
Put a memo together.
I guess I'm just not sure what exactly you want, though. You want to know what a bank reconciliation is?
I think that wouldn't hurt for the board to see, since it's, I mean, or I could share materials that would.
Well, the only things that have changed is the reconciliation
Yeah.
register,
That's
right?
something that the district always does, it's just we're sharing it with the board now. That's
Sure.
an internal document, so.
Could we,
I'm not sure what exactly you want.
could the board email me questions they have about the report, specific to explanation, and then I can compile those and share them with the administration?
Yeah, that's fine.
Would that be okay?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Seeing no further discussion, can we get a roll call vote?
Shiloh,
Yes.
Koppel,
Yes.
Evans,
Yes.
Grados,
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
Santu,
Yes.
DeVito,
Yes.
motion carried.
All right, the next item on the agenda is the public hearing for the 2024 tax levy. Right. At this time, I'd like to officially open the public hearing on the proposed tax levy for the 2024 year. The hearing is part of our regularly scheduled Board of Education meeting, and thank you for everyone who's come to attend. The purpose of this public hearing is to allow the community to provide input on the proposed tax levy. The levy is a critical part of our financial planning. It supports our ability to provide high-quality education and maintain essential district operations. Please note that this hearing is separate from the board's deliberation and vote on the tax levy, which will occur later during tonight's meeting. No board action will take place during the hearing. To provide context for this hearing, I'd now like to invite our Chief Financial Officer, Nicole Stuckert, to present the information that she has.
So for this public act, we are required to disclose the operating cash and investment balance for the following funds: the education fund, O&M, transportation, the IMRF or Social Security fund, and the working cash fund. So I'll just read these out loud. The education fund, as of October 31st, 2024, balance is $12,139,549. The O&M fund is $734,887. Transportation fund is $6,301,878. The retirement fund is $3,006,694. And the working cash fund is $4,973,290. Also, per board policy, we are required to disclose the ending expenditures for the same operating funds for the last 3 years. I don't think I'm required to actually read those out loud, so they're just there for the board policy.
Thank you very much, Nicole.
Mhm.
Before opening the floor for oral comments, I'd like to remind attendees that written comments or materials may also be submitted. These materials will be included in the official record of the hearing and considered by the board. If you have written submissions, we did receive some already. If you have written submissions, please hand them to our board secretary at this time. We'd now like to invite members of the public to provide their comments regarding the proposed tax levy. To ensure a respectful and efficient process, each speaker will be allotted 2 to 3 minutes. If you could, please approach the board, state your name and address for the record, and direct your comments to the board.
Good evening. My name is Ted Strack. I live at 1370 Winfield Drive here in Sycamore, Illinois. I've been a Sycamore resident my entire life. I want to thank everybody here for serving. This is pretty much a thankless job, and you have to make some very difficult decisions in that process. I do it at the Park District, so I understand, and I do truly appreciate those efforts. As a general statement, the people in Sycamore are taxed out. They recently got their assessments and they were out of sight. I know that as a board, you don't control the assessment. You control the tax rate. You have no control of the assessment. What you do have 100% control of is how much you tax the residents. You control that completely. So I would encourage you not to applaud yourself if you drop the tax rate. You need to think about what is the tax dollars you're going to get. I'm looking at the back of my notes, sorry about that. So I passed out some information, and on top of that information is the median taxes, the taxes on a median priced home, valued home in the communities in DeKalb County. The median means that there's many people paying more as there are paying less. It's right in the middle for all those cities. As you can see, Sycamore's at the top of this list in DeKalb County. When you look at the state, DeKalb County ranks number 8 in that state. If you take those top 8 counties, and that's on page 4 of this document, it's in the top 3% in the nation for real estate taxes, in the entire nation. If you look at Sycamore alone, we'd be number 2 on that list. And now I've been involved with many not-for-profits, and I've been involved in governmental entities as well. And one of the things I found with those two types of organizations is whatever money they get, they spend. If they get more money, they spend more money. If they get less money, they spend less money. At the end of the day, it always works out because it has to. So I feel like the community's at a point where something's got to give. The city of Sycamore is looking to do a nominal, hard dollar reduction in taxes to the average residents for the second year in a row. I just came from a Park District meeting where we're doing the same thing for the second year in a row. DeKalb is looking to reduce their taxes on an average $100 per home this coming year. The DeKalb County as an organization is doing the same thing. The school district represents 65% of the taxes collected. You have the biggest impact by far. It's time. We're taxed over the top. So again, when you make your decision tonight, if assessments have gone up 10%, I encourage you to reduce your tax levy 10%. Gather the new tax money for growth. That makes sense. Existing taxpayers should start paying the same amount year over year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone else from the audience who'd like to address the board at this time? Hearing no further comments or submissions, I hereby close the public hearing on the tax levy. Thank you to all who participated. Your feedback is invaluable and will be considered during the board's deliberation and vote later this evening. We'll now move on to the next item on tonight's agenda. Audience to visitors. If you wish to address the board this evening, please raise your hand at this time. When called upon, kindly state your name and address. Limit your comments to 3 minutes. Please refrain from mentioning specific names during your remarks. And in accordance with the Illinois Open Meetings Act, the board cannot engage in deliberative discussion or take immediate action on items not listed on the agenda. However, we want to assure you that your comments are important to us, and we will be taking them into consideration. Thank you for your understanding. Seeing no comments, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, the superintendent's report.
Under building department updates, you guys, the board has received those in writing previously. One of the reports was a departmental report from Learning and Teaching. So I've asked Director of Learning and Teaching, Mike Rice, to join us for a couple of minutes and just hit some highlights of those and then answer any questions the board may have. So my pleasure to turn it over to our Director of Learning and Teaching, Mike Rice.
Thanks. So this is my first time with the new rules, so I'm trying to follow them. I know that Nick told me just because I talk too much. But yeah, as Mr. Wilder said, you kind of seen the report, kind of know what's in there. I think some highlights on there. One of the biggest things to note is just all of our schools are commendable this year. I know last year we had one that was targeted, and even with just the minimal work that is, well, I shouldn't say minimal, but just the 1 year's worth of work that has gone into that, we've already kind of moved the needle on that a little bit. Typically, we're still beating the state averages on our AR assessments. Our science scores are still doing quite well. We did take a little step back in our SAT scores this year at the high school, which we're looking into as to why. Of course, in their infinite wisdom, we'll have new assessments through the state this year, so won't be able to kind of compare apples to apples there, but we'll do our best to kind of crosswalk that data. And the second part of what you have is our math assessments, and at this point of the year in the fall, that's really basically baseline data for a lot of our students, and then a lot of our classroom teachers and interventionists look at that data as far as are there any students we need to jump in and intervene with now or push a little further because they're ready for that enrichment. So those are some of the highlights of what I shared with you, and then just kind of here for any questions that we might have.
Any questions for Mr. Wright?
The only other thing
Yeah.
that stuck out to me when looking at the data was certainly beating the state averages, which is wonderful. Looking at 2019 to 2024, it looks like the state has, on the higher end, has kind of recovered a little bit more than Sycamore has on the IARs, excuse me. So I'm not sure if that's something that you're looking into or an open item that maybe is being reviewed.
Yeah,
But that
so
was
we're-
one thing that kind of stuck out.
Yeah, thanks, Rex. We're in the middle of an ELA and a math kind of curriculum revision district-wide. So those are the two places right now that are really getting a lot of heavy emphasis. So of course, this is one of those pieces that we're looking at when we do that, but we're just trying to make sure that we're teaching, everybody's teaching the same things. We've all agreed on what that means, how we're assessing them, and we're even looking at some new resources to support that. So I think definitely that's a huge part of what we're looking at right now.
Yeah, I'd be really interested to see what you learn and
Yeah.
the approach that you plan to take afterwards, because it's
For sure.
a little concerning there.
Yeah, for sure.
I suppose I'm curious on the status of the curriculum reviews.
Just like just an update.
Yeah,
So
sure.
we're piloting our math curriculum right now. So we will look to probably have a decision made on that by, I would say, March to April. And then we're in the process now of basically done with some of our essential standards for our ELA committees. And we're going to be looking at likely taking back to the committee a question as to whether or not we're ready to start maybe moving ahead, looking at resources to support that, or not support that a little earlier than we had expected. We thought next year would probably be the first time we might be ready to start looking at some resources. Just with the hard work that all the staff are doing, we might be ready a little bit earlier to start looking at that and let the rubber meet the road a little bit. So we're moving right along.
Are these curriculum reviews, I remember speaking with instructional coaches, and they're at the K-5 level. Are these reviews going K-8?
12, all the way through
Third,
12.
K-12?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, they look different at each kind of level, but I think like math right now is really a lot of that work lives in their PLC. ELA is a little bit more following at the 6-12 levels, more what the EC5 levels are doing, just kind of going through those essential standards right now. Resource adoption is really where it starts to look different, especially in the ELA world. There's a lot of times there's almost like a canned program that you look at for EC5, sometimes even up through 8. The older the students get, the more likely it is that the staff are kind of building that themselves, especially in the ELA world. So, but nope, that's happening all the way up through senior year.
Do we have a metric or a way to track the outcomes based on this curriculum to see if would just be scores go up, or is there another metric we'll use?
I think we'll use these
Worked
state
out.
scores that we'll look at. There'll be some local assessment. Obviously, max scores will kind of help us out as well. So kind of the same things that we look at now. Let's kind of keep looking at those year over year. Whenever we adopt a new curriculum, there's always this thing called an implementation dip, so we kind of know that's coming. I think we've done a lot of work with our math throughout the district, that I'm hoping that will be pretty minimal. But with that, we'll kind of get some teacher feedback, we'll get student feedback as well, and just see how are things comparing to what they've done in the years before. So in addition to kind of some of that more hard data, whenever we adopt a new curriculum, we try to kind of get some of that softer data as well. How that rollout's going, how supported people feel, things like that.
There's a note that you plan to look at how to improve absenteeism. Is there a target or a baseline maybe prior to COVID that you're aiming for? Or?
I wouldn't say a baseline. I think it just, after COVID, I think that was just a big one on our agenda. Like, okay, we know what was happening here through COVID. We've seen our numbers get a little higher than we want them to be. It's really kind of an independent, like individual based sort of thing. So those students that are kind of chronically truant or absent, it's not like a one-size-fits-all approach. So really what it is trying to figure out how do we meet the needs of this student and then this student and then this student and make sure that we're getting what they need. So more than like just a number that we want to hit, it's that. How do we scoop up as many as we can?
Okay. So it's not state report card related, it's more individual student.
Yeah. I mean, they reported on our state
Sure, of
report card,
course.
but as far as just the percentage, like our approach is more individuals.
Yeah, no, that's great, okay. I think that's all I have.
Awesome.
Any other questions for Mr. Rice?
Just looking at some of the key takeaways here, and thank you, Mike, for doing this. I really like the presentation, lays out really well. As it relates to the, like you're saying, so data is discussed at the building level as part of the school improvement planning, and as part of intervention planning. What, can you build out a little bit what you mean on like how that data gets integrated into school improvement planning?
Sure. So, I mean, the easiest way to kind of talk about that, since it's map data we're talking, there would be like data days at the elementary and middle schools. So whether it's a grade level team or a team like 6th grade that's more interdisciplinary, come together and look at that data for their group of students. And so they'll look at that and see if there's a super high achievers, like how can we push those a little bit further? If there's some students that are maybe below where they want to see them, what supports do we need to put into place for that? That's where some things in the past, like you've probably heard me talk about UFly in the past, which is one of the ELA. We started as an intervention, but now it's kind of a core resource. Like how do we utilize that with some of our students that are struggling? So a lot of that just built into those ongoing meetings that we're having. And that's more alive in kind of what that reference is there than maybe the IAR SAT data, because that's just so far removed from where we're at. So really it's that map data that we'd be talking about there.
Okay, gotcha. And then just looking at our strategic goals, and like one of them, so learning and teaching promote success in both academic and social emotional settings by exploring and implementing evidence-based, inclusive, learner-centered practices. And then it kind of lays out the district level action steps. A lot of what I'm seeing here, it says this is kind of like this is the baseline metric. And then is it the winter data or is it spring data that we then use to try to map back to some of those goals?
Both. So like we'll look at, I mean, by the time the winter data comes, that's a lot of time, that'll correspond a lot with staff's kind of SLOs, which is part of their evaluation process. So there's a huge part of that part of the year where we're looking at what's that growth been, what have we done, what plans have we built that have worked or not. But then spring's really the one where I'll usually have come back in the past, not sure if you'll invite me again, but if I do, that's where we're looking at that year-over-year growth and trying to look at those cohorts, how have they truly grown, have they gotten the goals that we kind of thought for them, hit the ones that MAP set for them or the ones that we've tweaked to kind of be more appropriate to them. So we'll look at it at both times.
Okay. Do you think a lot of the data that we're seeing in this PowerPoint is going to manifest itself into like a district goal update for the domain one of the strategic plan?
I think so.
Okay. It kind of builds on it, and then like Portrait of the Spartan, I know totally separate. Going off the PowerPoint.
That's fine.
I know we're in empathy this month.
Yes.
So do you have can you just 10-second spiel on,
Sure.
on what that looks like in the classroom?
Yeah, so I think, well, if you haven't watched the videos yet, please do. That are online. That'll give you a really nice kind of glimpse into at least one classroom. But we just kind of did some walkthroughs as an ad team earlier this month. And I think it's really just seeing the opportunities that teachers are making for students. Most of these dispositions that we're at right now, it's really just a place of how do we make opportunities for students to demonstrate this. As it's not so much I'm going to teach this to you now so you can go do it, but when there's an event that hurts the circle of the community, for example, they might do a restorative circle, and then students get to kind of get a sense of this is how this person must have felt, or this is how I made this person feel. So it's really just looking for those opportunities to bring those up right now, and then over time we'll kind of create that bank. There are plans that will hopefully happen later this year into next year where we're going to look at what does that look like specifically at every grade level. So for example, like what does empathy look like for a kindergartner? What specific things can they work on all the way up through 12th grade? We just haven't built those out yet. So that'll be a little bit easier to speak to as opposed to right now it's just, like I said, kind of creating those opportunities for students to demonstrate and looking for those teachable moments, I would say.
Last thing, and I'll leave you be.
Ask as many as you want.
So under domain 4 of our strategic plan is instructional technology. Our district goal is to support the use of technology for learning and teaching and to facilitate student success. A big part of this, it looks like, is like a technology adoption framework, and then also online self-paced learning, and then it gets into a little bit about like measuring more specifically how that technology is coming across. Do you think the information from this PowerPoint will be useful baseline context for like when we do springtime reevaluation of that strategic goal?
Yeah, I mean, that's crossing a little bit of Dr. Valentine's area there that I don't want to step on her toes, but I do think like this set of data that we're getting right now is definitely what we look at and try to say, how did everything we did throughout the year impact? And it's hard to kind of break everything down into each individual thread, but you can't not look at these things. This is where our students started, and that's where they're going to be, so it'll definitely come up in some way, shape, or form.
Okay. I just, thinking about the strategic plan, like this to me seems like this is like critical data that we want to bookmark, so that way we can reference it later when we revisit the strategic plan in the springtime. So,
I agree.
and that's sounding like you're, okay.
And usually when if you do invite me back, I'll usually bring this up, and you'll see, here's where we started, here's where we go. So if you lose these, don't worry, I'll bring it back for you.
Well, I'd very much like to have you come back.
Yeah, I'd love to be
Love
here.
have you.
I talk a lot though, so you gotta be, they usually try to keep me quiet.
I had one other question for you. I think I know the answer to this, but I noticed that second grade seems to skew to the lower percentile. And having a second grader, I think I know why, but I'm not sure. Is that because the technology shift, because they use the trackpad and they have to read, or is this a grade that you have concern about that we need to do something?
We don't have a concern about, like, there's, second grade's it's a tricky one because of that, because the technology changed, but also I think that's really where, like, the reading starts to become much more difficult for them, and what it's assessing on there. So, typically we see our second grade scores start off a little bit lower. I would say, I mean, if anybody back there wants to disagree with me, feel free, but they tend to kind of recover throughout the year, so I wouldn't say at this point it's too concerning.
If I may.
Yeah, please do.
The test itself changes in second grade. In kindergarten, first grade, the test reads to them, or in second, they have to do all the reading themselves. So we definitely see a little bit of dip in that fall, but then by winter, spring, we see an increase.
Is that what you meant by the technology?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry,
Thank
just
you.
to-
Oh, no, I appreciate it.
That's
Thank
good
you.
clarity for everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mike. Is there any other questions for Mike?
I have one more,
Yeah.
sorry. You touched on the comparing the fall to spring earlier. Are there goals for, we want to see 5% growth in reading in this cohort, or, for example, or is
So-
it more just a qualitative assessment?
So it depends, some of both. Some schools will set specific goals, and we want to see this. The middle school is one of them that has traditionally done that in the past. Like, we want to see this much growth, especially in like you guys still focusing on nonfiction this year too? I know last year there's a lot of nonfiction focus. So some schools really do that with the actual, like, we want to see a whole cohort growth. But what the MAP system does is it kind of creates those growth goals individually for each student. And so that's a lot of the conversation is really more about are each individual students getting to those goals? What helps them get there? What can we do to help them get there? Or what can we do to push them further? So it's all kind of, it's all in there, whether it's individual or if it's a school-wide goal.
From a district perspective, at the building level, classroom teachers can look at their individual students. One of the things I like about MAP is that it sets, based on their performance, it sets a growth target for the year. So teachers can keep an eye on that and have conversations with students. At the district level, one of the things I look at every year is just the percentage of students who met their growth target from fall to spring. 3,700 kids, not all of them take MAP, take out the high school. 2,500 kids, that's still a lot. So it helps me from a district level perspective kind of get a sense of how our students are performing overall in each grade level. I've got access to go down to building level and grade levels if I wanted to, but it's a really nice metric at the district kind of upper level. How many of our students are reaching that growth target? And I think MAP does a pretty good job of based on student performance, creating a target that's reasonable. Pushes them a little, challenges them a little bit, but it's reasonable.
I think, sorry.
Go ahead.
I think seeing that data would help, how many students met their goals, not individual students for obvious reasons, but collectively, we've seen middle school students tend to have met their goals more than K-5. I'm not saying that's the case, but
For sure.
I think that's data that would be valuable.
So if you remember last year, and I can tweak whatever you need, but that's when those quadrant charts really come in well, and it talks about growth and achievement, and they're really helpful in the spring. You can look at them in the winter, but it's mid-year data, so it's not the most helpful. But in the spring, it kind of says, as a school, what was the growth percentiles of our students on average versus, and what was the school, like the achievement data. And that was one of the things, our big celebrations last year was in math, all of our elementary, well, our middle schools too, high growth, high achievement. So that's definitely one that will come back later in the year, and if you want me to bring that in a different format, I'd be happy to do that too.
Thank you very much, Mike.
You're welcome. Thank you all.
Thank you. The other item under superintendent's report is just board member appreciation. So you guys all know this, members of the audience may not know this, but November 15th is National Board Member Appreciation Day. So as Mr. Track alluded to earlier, it can be a thankless job, right? You have to make difficult decisions, and unfortunately the pay does not match the level of responsibility sometimes, or the level of challenge. So I just want to take a minute and thank each of you individually for your time, for your commitment, for your dedication. It's not always easy, but it is rewarding. And Mike alluded to the increase in math scores in specific. When I walked through buildings in the spring after MAP testing was over, that's one of the things that the teachers were super proud of and very excited about. You guys have a direct impact on that by decisions that you make that benefit students down the road. So on behalf of a very thankful administrative team as well as the entire district, thank you for all that you do. We left a little something for you at each of your places, but wanted to make sure that we acknowledge the work that you do, so thank you. About a round of applause for the board members.
Thank you, Steve.
Yeah, you're welcome.
So the next item on the agenda is board reports. So item 7.01, the FOIA report. Is there any discussion in general terms about items in the FOIA report? If there is interest in more detailed discussion, we can, under exception 9, have that discussion in executive session. But only if there is interest from the board can we make that mid-agenda modification. So,
I had interest for the last item, the item there.
AG4, okay. All right, so then we'll go ahead and, all right, so then what we'll do is we'll add then the exception 9 to the preamble for executive session. So, anything else on the FOIA report? Okay, we'll move on to the suspension report. Any comments?
I mean, it looks, and I don't recall seeing a lot of this in the 11 and a half years I've been here, but a lot of bus suspension, bus-related behavior. I see you shaking your head.
I knew you were going to say that.
Can you provide a comment just on emerging challenges we're seeing and whether there's anything that the board needs to do to support?
I think the buildings have been super supportive. We look at behavior from a safety perspective, what's distracting both to the drivers, the students, being good peer models and leaders on the bus. We take parent complaints seriously, so we have people call in with things, we watch the videos. If they get suspended from the bus or there's a discipline related to the bus, they still can attend school, obviously, so that isn't impacted at all. We do a lot of parent discussion and we try to work with people at home. Usually the suspension has grown from other interventions. We go to the schools a lot of times and meet with the deans, we'll meet with kids in person, just trying to do a bunch of different interventions. But usually the bus suspension is just kind of a reset for behavior. But it usually stems from something safety related, either for the driver who's driving or the peers riding with them.
I guess the question more was just as a trend, is behavior getting worse or are we just being more strict on an enforcement?
I would say the first year I was here, probably it was a me problem. To help with driver retention, we were supporting them more in some of the things that they didn't maybe feel supported in previously. Third year in, I would say the behavior has changed where it's becoming more frequent, or maybe a single bus suspension would have kind of solved the problem, and now it's taking a few more of those types of interventions. So, yeah, I would say just speaking with the buildings in general, it's been more of a behavior piece. So.
Thank you.
Any other comments on the suspension report? Seeing no additional comments, we'll move on to the next item, which is board, district, non-district committees reports. More specifically, we'll start with, Alex has provided us some board notes for us to view, which I thought were very thorough and detailed. Thank you for doing that. And just adding to the annual conference notes, there's a separation which he has for the results of the delegation assembly. So just be sure to note that. Alex, did you want to make any comments?
Not particularly. I mean, I think if you have any questions, let me know. I would say one thing, the delegate assembly voted exactly how the resolutions committee recommended, so there were no areas of surprise there.
Excellent. Does anyone else want to share any information they think might be valuable for the board to hear? Yeah, go ahead.
The North Grove School Association met. They're going to be having a Christmas event on December 7th, Saturday. It's sort of an open house where they'll have you can come to the schoolhouse and participate in some Christmas decorations, as well as learn about what it was like in these one-room schools. And I think it would be a good opportunity for anybody who's interested in going.
What time does that start?
I will get that to you.
Okay, great. That sounds so cool.
But I believe it's 1 to 4 p.m.
The maximum
Haven't been there in a
occupancy
long
is
time.
15 people, right?
They'll make sure they have room. There's actually extra space that they can go in the back.
Unless you're going to tuition it.
We have to pay some tuition.
Any other comments?
I'll just mention SEF met. The biggest thing I would like to put on just your radar is that trivia night is like one of the bigger fundraisers for SEF. That is Friday, February 28th, which seems like it's so far away, but it's absolutely not. It'll be here anytime. So, but just put that on your radar. If you've got nothing going on, want to celebrate the last day of February with me and a bunch of other people, you should come to the SEF trivia night. It's a great time.
Do you have to be good at trivia to go to that?
You don't. You're in a table full of people. You could literally not answer a question, and you're still good to go.
Oh, sounds
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Probably learned something that night.
So I have a couple of comments. So first, IASB conference. If you guys do have any notes or anything that you want to share with each other, if you want to send them to me, and then what we can do is we can centralize them in one spot, so that way everyone can access them. Tuesday, right? So we're like coming a day off of it. It's been a whirlwind, so take your time, and then we can just aggregate that information, put it up. I know I have some good takeaways. Also, just hold my notes. School board governance recognition is something they talked about at IASB as sort of a thing to strive for, and it's basically a recognition that acknowledges school boards that have engaged in activities that lead to excellence in local school governance. So this is a 2-year process. So it basically is like a trailing 2-year period, and the application opens up in March. The deadline is July 1st, and so obviously it opens up every year, but for the trailing 2, there are a list of evidence pieces that like we as a board would need to upload to evidence that we are worthy of the school board governance recognition. Only like 8% of the schools in the state receive that recognition. Looking at some of the description items, and I can share this with anybody who's interested in it, and this may be a better topic for a future agenda item, but I just wanted to share that that was something that was a neat takeaway and maybe a thing to think about. The other piece was, I know I spoke with a few board members who had talked about updates, wanting certain updates, things to that effect. So if anybody is looking for particular updates or particular pieces of information, you want to send that to me, we can send it to admin, and then we can maybe work to incorporate that into like a meeting agenda, something to that effect. So things like facilities or admin building, anything to that effect. So if there is interest for that, please email me, let me know, so that way we can make it an item. Okay, and then, other than that, oh yes, last board meeting, or the last special board meeting that we had talked about the superintendent evaluation process more in general terms. There was a document that was shared with everyone on the board, and then the follow-up action was us to set another date. Something for the board to consider may be utilizing an ad hoc committee to work through this. This would give us the flexibility to have full board attendance or not full board attendance, but at the same time, because we added like 4 workshops in the last 3 months and a lot of extra meetings, and I know that, you know, we've all got busy lives, so wanted to, as we get into that scheduling piece, throw out the option for the formation of an ad hoc committee. So I wanted to just poll you, see if there's any interest in that meeting taking that format.
So it would be an additional meeting, or would it be converting the superintendent evaluation workshop to an ad hoc?
Right, so we had the superintendent evaluation workshop. We agreed that we should have a special meeting formed in lieu of forming just a traditional special meeting, forming a ad hoc committee that would be tasked with delivering to the board a recommendation chaired by an individual, still subject to Open Meetings Act, still available for anybody to attend, but giving us the flexibility of not needing a quorum. That's really the advantage. So say nothing if you're very interested. Okay, seeing no comments?
I'm good either way.
Right.
However it works best for everyone. I have no problem with being at a special meeting for it.
Gotcha. So then the way that would look is then we would form this, and we would then appoint, the board president would appoint somebody to chair that committee. It would then be formed as a special meeting. You would see an agenda posted, it'd be subject to Open Meetings Act, you could attend. And the directive from the board would be to have a deliverable on the superintendent evaluation process. Just general consensus, everyone likes that?
Yes.
Could we bring someone from ISB back? Do you think that's necessary to help actually create an instrument?
I would think that that special committee would be, use the resources they have available to make the best deliverable.
Between the materials we got, the
Yeah.
training and what's out there already from other districts, I think we can put together a very good process.
Yes, there's already a very good one that I liked anyway.
Okay. So, and I think then, soliciting that input might be a really good idea for that special committee to do. It's just so they can aggregate that, work within those bounds. It touches on goal setting too, so I think that would be within the auspice of that. So, okay, so then that gives me some direction. Thank you, guys. That's all I have for board reports. Is there any other report anybody would like to make? All right, so then the first item under old business is the adoption of the 2024 tax levy resolution. There are several pieces of information that we'll go over during the discussion phase of the resolution. But to kick that off, I just want to solicit a motion to approve the 2024 tax levy resolution as presented. Clarifying, the motion doesn't obligate you to vote for it, nor does the second. It just allows us to engage in discussion, review information, and then make a deliberative action. Is there a motion to approve the 2024 tax levy resolution as presented?
So moved.
Second.
Jones? Seconded. All right, related to discussion, we've got a couple of items here. Is there any comment from the administration related to?
I didn't have anything new from what was presented at the board.
Right, and just recapping, we did see all this information at the tentative levy, so nothing's changed. All the same information. Okay, is there any discussion from the board then?
I'll make some general comments as it relates to some public comment we had earlier. Just to frame the discussion around the tax levy, obviously being fiscally diligent and conservative is something that this board has always strived to do. And I don't think that seeing your tax bill is a good reflection of the amount of work that's gone into that from the board standpoint and from the district's standpoint. It's probably more useful to look at our district compared to some of those neighboring districts just from how money is spent at the school level. And that sort of information is available publicly through the Illinois report card. And one of the things you'll find, just as a single number, if you want to look at that, is how many dollars are spent to educate a student. And I'll just point out that FY24, which is the latest information that's in there, Sycamore spends $15,162 per student to educate. If we compare to some of the lower numbers on this graph that was provided, for example, DeKalb spends almost $3,700 per student more at $18,847. Sandwich, who's obviously way down on the list there, spends $16,052, so almost $900 more per student than Sycamore. So I just provide that as some context that if you aren't aware, I think Sycamore does probably one of the best jobs in the county, if not in Upper Illinois, as far as the amount of money that we spend to educate a single student. And I think a lot of that is actually borne by the very trim administration that we have and the dedication of our long-standing staff that helps our district. The grounds crew that does a lot of work without us having to outsource work. Those are just examples. So I'm very proud of where we're at. It's unfortunate that the state of Illinois does a very poor job of funding us. We're hurt by the percentage of low-income students that we have compared to those districts, which tends to lead to lower dollars from the state, lower dollars from the federal government to offset what is our property tax base. And unfortunately, we have very little commercial real estate in Sycamore to help offset that as well. So this burden is unfortunately borne by the taxpayers' home values. So I just wanted to provide those comments for the record.
Any other comments? Seeing no further comments, we'll host a vote by roll call.
Koppel,
Yes.
Evans,
No.
Grados,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Santu,
Yes.
Shiloh,
Yes.
DeVito.
Yes.
Motion carried.
The next item on the agenda is the approval of the sale of 520 North Maple Street. Is there a motion to approve the sale of 520 North Maple Street?
So moved.
Second.
Second, is there any discussion related to the sale of 520 North Maple Street?
We're getting exactly what our asking price was for it.
Yes, so we had two bidders. As you recall, the minimum threshold was $460,000, so they had to bid at least that much. One bid was $460,000 and the second one was $468,000. So we're recommending obviously that the one with the higher bidder. And you had a copy of the contract that was in there, so their proposed close date is February 1st. We feel that that's appropriate, so we're ready to move forward with that.
Sooner than expected. That's awesome.
Very nice.
Any other comments?
No, I kind of like that we have some time because it'll allow us to move some more operations out of there. I assume we've still got some stuff getting out.
Is there any updates on the administration building?
I think to that may be something we want to keep to a future agenda item,
Okay.
just to keep it germane to this motion. That's okay.
The sale of this building was, the discussion of that was to help justify some of the expenses that were incurred with the new admin building.
It was always part of our plan to move the warehouse because of the additional space at the building on Bethany Road. But absolutely, selling that building, once we move the operation, we don't have a need for it. Thought there would be, pretty sure there would be strong interest for that building, there was. But it does offset part of that cost, for sure.
Seeing no further comment, we'll put this to a vote. For the sale of property, I did confirm we don't need a roll call, but I'm going to call one anyway, because I'm not perfect. So, Kelly, would you call the roll?
Evans,
Yes.
Grados,
Yes.
Jones,
Yes.
Santu,
Yes.
Shiloh,
Yes.
Koppel,
Yes.
DeVito.
Yes.
Motion carried.
All right, the next item on the agenda is the elimination of transfer tax. Now, I'll pause now. Given the nature of this particular item and its history, there was past information produced a considerable amount of time ago that was made available to the board. But before we post a motion in a second, because I don't know the nature of what that motion may be, I'm going to facilitate a little discussion. If anyone has some comments on this they'd like to make that they think may be helpful to build a motion or a resolution.
Is the transfer tax the one where it's only allowed to be spent on certain things? The transfer tax, and then there's an impact fee.
And that, so.
Both going to the general
You
fund.
want-
Yeah.
Yeah,
The transfer tax is unrestricted.
it's unrestricted.
Yeah, impact
So-
fees do have restrictions to them.
What are we spending money, those monies on that the district is receiving?
It just goes into our general fund. So it's
General
just a
fund towards-
Operations of the district.
Towards operation?
We're only talking about the transfer tax.
Just the
We're not
transfer
talking
tax,
about-
yep. We'll get to the impact fee in a second.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify, because I know one of them is limited, and I can't remember which one when I read the, but can they be separated from one another? In other words, could you repeal one and leave the other one, or, I guess that's my question. These are two separate taxes, they don't run consecutive. And then if somebody purchases a home, one home in the district, and then they move, are they taxed for both of them?
Is the administration able to produce an answer on that tonight?
So if you're in the district, or if you're in the city limits, it's the city, first of all, there's a tax and a fee. They're not both taxes. One's a tax, one's a fee, technically.
Okay.
If you're within the district, and I want to make sure I'm doing this right, transfer tax, if you're within the district or the city limits already, and you move within the city limits, there's no additional transfer tax. It's only if you live outside of the city and move into the city. Just for clarification, because there was concern voiced about this several months ago. If you live in the city, you move outside of the city limits, and then you move back in. When you move back in, even though you lived there before, the transfer tax applies, yeah.
Okay, then the fee is for,
And we'll get to that
Okay.
in a little bit.
Yeah.
That's okay.
okay, sure.
If the board wanted to make a decision, and just, you guys know this, just for the sake of the audience, I'm not recommending that the district eliminate either of those. They provide a revenue stream that's pretty important to the district. I understand the impact of the impact fee and the transfer tax, but you could separate them if you wanted to. They're not tied together.
Okay.
Is there any motion related to this item? Seeing if there is no motion, the item will fall off the agenda. We'll move on to the next item. Seeing no motion, the item is eliminated from the agenda. We'll move on to the next item, which is elimination of impact fees. Similar to the elimination of the transfer tax item, so we can craft a motion or a resolution if there's interest. I want to just open this up for any general questions or discussion.
I would just say, just for context, impact fee is a little bit different. It's for new construction. And the idea was a new home, family, more students, there's an impact to the district. So a little bit different than the transfer tax, at least the rationale for it. But wanted to just share that for a little bit of context. And this is information that we presented, I think, January of '23.
Right, and that goes twice over to the audience too. We had a pretty extensive conversation about this in January, went through a lot of details. It didn't culminate to an item on the agenda, and so it was asked to be placed on the agenda, which for good reason. So now we're just deciding if there's anything we should do with this. So any other discussion related to this particular item?
Do we have data on nearby districts' impact fees and how they compare?
Is the administration able to produce any information on
No.
that at this point?
We didn't prepare that.
Okay.
We can look into that, but we didn't have that prepared.
I guess, do you even think that's data we could access? Like, is that?
Should be public.
Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
public information.
Imagine.
So traditionally, it's my understanding that cities, townships operate in one of two models. There's either a model where general tax revenue that the city collects, they allocate or provide land at no cost to the district to say, here's where you're gonna build a school. The other model is the school district gets no funding from the city to go out and purchase land and build buildings, and instead these impact fees take that place because a portion of that funding is allocated to the school to say, hey, we know we didn't give you a space for a school, but when you need one, at least you've got some funds to be able to do so. So that's the model that, am I incorrect in that understanding?
Is the administration able to produce any
Yeah,
information on that?
I believe that's accurate. The other distinction here, because it's impacted families moving in, it's not just the school district. So one of the bullet points is that all taxing bodies receive revenue from impact fees. Because the impact on a new family moving into the district isn't just on the school, it's the public library, it's the park district, it's multiple taxing bodies. That's different than that.
So we're not the only one receiving from this one, but on the
Correct.
prior, the transfer tax.
That's correct.
We are.
And we did look at the impact fees about 10 years ago, I think, and did an assessment. I can't remember if we compared to other municipalities at that time, but we did look at our fee schedule and completely redid it to bring it into some sort of new alignment. And I don't remember off the top of my head what.
Based off of the,
Mhm.
Yeah.
neighborhood model.
Other exemptions, like 55-plus retirement communities or something like that? Or is it every single home, any place with a bedroom?
The only exemptions we've done is if a home is like burned down and then we built a home, we haven't charged them yet.
So this is added on to the yearly tax
No.
bill, or this is a one-time?
This is collected when you build your home.
Just a one-time, okay.
So typically, the person building the home doesn't really see it directly, like they're going somewhere to pay that. It's just part of the house contract price.
Okay.
The builder themselves have to go into the city.
I would be curious just to see where we compare to other districts to ensure that we're competitive for new construction development.
As far as I know, everyone uses the neighborhood model, so
So all the,
it should.
Okay.
the same.
okay. That's really helpful, thanks.
Is there a motion on this item or any additional discussion that the board wants to propose? Or?
Even if we wanted to eliminate it, would it be within our power to do so, or would these other taxing bodies have a say?
Are you able to produce an answer on that?
So we could request it, but other taxing bodies would need to be consulted as well. And ultimately, both of these are implemented by the city. We don't have the authority to eliminate either one of them. It's sort of city's purview to do that. We could request that, but especially with this one, because other taxing bodies receive that revenue, they would need to be consulted first.
Is there any additional discussion or proposed resolution or motion on this? All right, then we'll just carry on to the next item on the agenda. All right, so under new business on our agenda, we have the press policy revisions first reading. Is there a motion to discuss the first reading policy revisions, press 116, and revisit the topic under old business for second reading in January?
So,
Second.
And second, is there any discussion related to this item? Or would the policy committee like to formulate any opinion at this point?
I suppose I can run over the main highlights from press 116. So there was a list, so on the memo that you'll see, it's titled Updated Policy Committee, something or another, there's no ellipses, you can't see the full title. But what's in that memo are the places where the policy committee chose optional language or decided to make an alteration beyond the scope of what press recommended. So the three things we did were omit the optional list of trainings to 5,100, and then we decided to add a female complaint manager for Title IX claims as that was recommended to do so. Was that recommended by legal or was that by press?
That came out of discussion amongst the committee.
I thought there was, okay. Regardless, that somewhere along the lines recommended that we do that, and it seems to make sense. So that there's both genders represented with light management. That's all I have to present. Does anyone have any questions about Press 116?
All right. Is there a motion, or I'm sorry, is there a, we do a voice vote to approve that motion? And the original motion was to discuss the policy revisions of Press 116 and revisit the topic under old business for a second reading in January. So, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right. So the next item on the agenda is item 9.02, board review policy revisions, first reading. So there were some notes related to the policy committee meeting that happened on October 29th, and some proposed revisions. Is there a motion to discuss the policy committee revisions proposed and revisit the topic under old business in December?
So moved.
Second.
Seconded. Would the policy committee like to give a brief overview of what these
It's
policy
a
changes
longer
are?
list, so I suppose it would be more efficient to just open it up to questions about.
At a
these
high level,
changes.
can you just, what the policies that are affected are?
Sure. Policy 120, we decided to change the operation, it pertains to district organization operations and cooperative agreements. We just, instead of listing out all the operations, we basically have it set where it's informing the community that we do engage in joint programs with external entities. Policy 130, we added a hyperlink so that our mission statement is always up to date. Policy 280, it was kind of funny. In the policy, it said insert district name. We inserted the district name. 470, we discussed but decided no changes were needed. 4190, we decided to replace the language board goal with priority, as we have sort of our own board goals on the website as part of our strategic design, and having board goals that were separate from that is sort of was confusing, so we decided to make that change. We decided to remove the sentence in 4150 that states board approvals needed for renovations or permanent alterations when the total cost exceeds $12,500. We thought that was sort of restrictive on administration and bringing us a lot of reports. But the one caveat there is with this new budget calendar that we'll be discussing, we'll see sort of a higher level overview of capital projects in the springtime, but we won't necessarily approve each individual project as it occurs. And that's all of the policy changes. The committee recommended creating a budget calendar, which will come up later on our agenda, I believe, and an annual facilities plan.
When you say it like that, it makes 3 hours of work sound like nothing. So, yeah, good stuff. So thank you guys.
That's what I remember hearing.
That's why we have a committee.
Yeah. All right. Is there any further discussion, questions, comments on that?
No, this is great work, guys.
Yeah, I'd just like to thank the committee for their work.
It's a lot of work.
All right. And so restating the motion, is there a motion to discuss the policy committee revision as proposed, revisit the topic under old business in December? We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, motion passes. All right, the next item on the agenda is item 9.03, 2025-2026 district calendar, first reading. Is there a motion to discuss the draft 2025-2026 calendar now and revisit the topic under old business in December?
So moved.
Second.
Second. At this point in time, is there any board discussion related to the calendar? prior to administrative information? No? Is there any administrative information you think might be helpful?
So it's very similar calendar from last year. The one thing that we did add was a couple of half-day school improvement days. One of the requests we've received from staff is just more opportunities for professional development. We recognize that as well at the administrative level, so we worked on a couple of additional school half-day school improvement days. Other than that, it's very well aligned to the current school year calendar. District leadership team had voice in this, SESA leadership had voice in this, and then SEA, there's contract language that specifies that SEA calendar representatives meet with me. I had that meeting with both of those representatives, and calendar was well received. Actually surveyed the SEA membership on a couple of different questions, so we incorporated that feedback into the calendar. So a lot of eyes on this already, but it's ready to come to the board for first reading, and then would be second reading in December.
And there won't be any, just so that there's no surprises with staff, like of sudden days off when, we're gonna, I'm sure that they're gonna be given advance notice if there's any change to the calendar.
They would be. The only changes I anticipate, other than an emergency kind of situation where we have to, I've heard of schools having to close schools because of a flood or something like that.
Right.
Other than that, it would just be emergency days for snow or inclement weather. We've made a decision for the last couple of years not to use e-learning days and use traditional emergency days in place of that. But when those happen, I think everybody anticipates weather is coming, and we get the message out as soon as we can if there's a cancellation.
Okay, sounds good.
Generally, go ahead. Just generally speaking, curious how those half-days are going to be used. Do we have a vision yet? And then also, if that affects the school time, the students, or is there an extra day to cover that?
So half-day school improvement days are allowed under school code. If students attend so many hours, and I get more specific, but if you bank enough hours, our school days actually a little bit longer than the state requires. So we bank some hours, and that allows us to count those days, even though students are gone, half a day, still allows us to count those days. So they don't have to be made up. And there's already been some discussion about how to use those days either at the building level or at the district level. And there's a lot of things going on. Mr. Rice, who was here earlier, talked about ELA, that curriculum review process that's ongoing. The math, resources are being piloted right now. So a lot of opportunity to do things either at the district level or the building level. Because this is a change, we don't have that ironed out quite yet, but there's already been pretty good discussion about it.
Steve, I'd just add, these would replace our early dismissals, not be in addition to our early dismissals. It would just be dismissing slightly earlier.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on that?
So right now, we have 2-hour early dismissals spread out in our current calendars and have for several years. So in the future calendar, instead of those being 2-hour early dismissals, they would be half-days.
So they released at 11, instead of 1?
I don't know the
essentially?
specifics. They're all on different belt schedules, so we
Well,
have
it
to
is
figure
a
it
high
out.
school
But yeah,
level, from what I remember.
other
Yeah.
districts, it's like an 11:30 dismissal, let's
Okay.
say. And lunch is not built into the school day, like it would be in a 2-hour early dismissal.
How do we provide lunch to students that are entitled to that, or is that not needed?
On those days, we wouldn't, and it's not required.
Okay.
And that's something we would communicate to families in advance, so they know that's going to be a change.
I think this is the second calendar in a row that's kind of had that end of year date be passed, maybe Memorial Week, and pushing into that first week of June. Is that something that the community should expect going forward? Is that our calendar is going to start a little bit later, or is it just because of the way the last couple of years have fallen?
Every couple of years, the calendar shifts back a little bit later back in August, which pushes back the end date. And then as the years go by, you kind of catch up a little bit. The alternative would have been to start like on August 12th.
Right.
But that was part of the discussion, and everybody involved, leadership team, says that SAA representatives preferred it that way, and the feedback from staff was positive in terms of our start date. Everybody knows that if you start a little bit later, you end a little bit later. But I think everybody was pretty happy with it. Sooner or later, we'll catch up and we'll get back to right around the Memorial Day for the last day.
I didn't have a preference, just wanted to be able to respond to comments if they rise. So.
Yeah.
Why is it so late? It seemed to come up a ton, at least for me this year.
Yeah.
Is there any additional comments related to this item? So restating the original motion, is there a motion to discuss the draft 2025-2026 calendar now and revisit the topic under old business in December? There was a motion, there was a second. I'll take a roll call vote. I'm sorry, voice vote. Take a voice vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Next item on the agenda is item 9.04, district budget calendar. Is there a motion to approve the budget calendar as proposed?
So moved.
Seconded.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion, as well as any amendments proposed to the original motion related to the budget calendar or its contents? Some helpful context. This budget calendar facilitates the inclusion of, well, the removal of a district or a board representation on a district committee for finance, and instead replaces it with a review as a committee of the whole. There is also an item that describes reduction in force as opposed to change in force. So those are just some notable language inclusions here. So if you see or believe any modifications to this calendar are warranted, you could propose an amendment to the original motion for vote. Any discussion on the original motion?
I would like to amend the motion then. I'm sorry, I remember we had this conversation and I just assumed that the change was made. I would like to change reduction in force to change in force.
So your proposed amendment to the original motion is to approve the district budget calendar with the revision of reduction in force to change in force. Is that correct? All right. Is there a second?
Seconded.
And seconded. Is there any discussion on the amended motion, which includes approving the budget calendar with the revision, reduction to change? Note that if this passes, the original motion will be amended and we'll still vote on the original motion. Additional amendments can be hosted.
I know at a special meeting maybe a month or two ago, there was some discussion about understanding kind of priorities of the district, changes that may be things that are going on at the schools that are important at the school level, and maybe getting a report out at that earlier on than maybe the April timeframe. Just a general idea of kind of priorities, if there are changes in priorities or big things that we should expect to know about in the budget. I'm not sure if that's something that we still have interest in or not.
So, and I'll take that question too, Ellen, because we, I know Steve and I, we spoke about this, and it fell, if I remember correctly, under the auspice of the January administrative action, which was listed as the district begins budget planning meetings for the following fiscal year with the district leadership team. Is that correct?
Mhm.
And while it's specified as administrative action, it indicates its presence, but it's notable that there is no inclusion of a required report. So if the board wants to, include a specific ask in the calendar, that's something we could do, or it could fall into our realm of reports that aren't linked to policy but precedent. But this is a really good time to, I guess, set an example for how we may handle reports like it in the future. Do we want to formalize them with policy, or do we want them to be included in documents like this? Does that kind of clarify your question and raises another question?
I think it does both those things, yes.
Clear as mud. So. Is there any additional comment related to that or preference from the board?
I'm not sure I understand the motivation for the change in force versus reduction in force, unless it's just to try and use some, euphemistic language perhaps, but is reduction in force is more of a contractual language.
Yeah.
I would
That's gonna be my
caution the
question.
board against making that change
Yeah.
legally. The board has to approve a reduction in
It's
force.
school
If
code.
we're recommending a reduction in force, there's contract language that specifies the term reduction in force. I apologize, I didn't know that change was
I'm sorry, I
potential,
thought-
otherwise I would have counseled that, but yeah.
That's-
I would caution against that.
So, Michael, I just thought you had that conversation.
No, and
Okay.
I think the greater question too related to it is, in terms of our responsibility for FTE.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of was the origin of that change piece.
Mhm.
And so I don't know how much of a bearing that has on this, or if you, again, from a granularity standpoint, want to specify our involvement in FTE, because I know precedent has been that the district finance committee has presented FTE change in the past. And so do we want to, in this board calendar, indicate that that FTE change be a part of the report presented, or do we want to use more general terminology and then set that expectation or that ask more or less later? And that's again another choice of like how this tool is going to serve the board. You know, how specific, because it goes to Alan's earlier question, how specific do we want this tool to be? Should it reference specific reports, or should it speak in more general terms? Giving a little more history to this calendar, it's referenced in our board policy, but there is no press language that supports it, but I do think it is helpful to keep the board on track so we can, again, keep ourselves accountable to different items, and it also helps promote transparency in the public. So how detailed we get with this calendar is a real preference choice, and now is the time. So
I like the detail of the calendar. I think it already explicitly states that there are presentations at least, so I think the format or content of those presentations could be outlined in a separate policy or memorandum or whatever you want to call it. I don't think it needs to be tied to a calendar, because the calendar specifically specifies what happens and when. I don't think the how is so much that that's the place for it.
I would also say that, but for a couple of exceptions, the calendar is based on, by and large, what we do already, as, you know, current practice. So there's not a huge difference between what we're doing now and what's represented in the calendar. We did build the calendar based off of a couple of different models, but we revised those models to fit what current practice is. So I like that the calendar is kind of the broad, hey, here's what we do in a given year. But if there's something that the board would like done differently, information, you know, the FTE conversation is part of the district. It's been part of the district financial
Yeah.
presentation. If the boards would prefer to have that done at a board meeting as opposed to in a committee, we can do that. Probably tweak it just a little bit, but
So I'll withdraw my motion. The intent behind it was to see that slide that shows the FTE increase at a whole board level since the finance committee would be dissolved.
sure.
That was the only, so I don't know if we need a separate line item on this calendar, then we'll see changes in or staff in addition to a RIF, if the RIF is applicable.
I think the board can probably just agree on what presents preliminary financial projections would include, and just make a request that projections include changes in staffing levels, and that would satisfy.
well, again, any additional changes in FTE would have been part of that presentation already. So
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that that finance committee presentation made its way back somehow.
to,
Well, it would be presented to the whole board since they wouldn't be a finance committee.
yeah.
Okay.
He's just saying typically the finance subcommittee got a more detailed
Yeah,
presentation
yeah.
than the one that made it to the general board, so if we're eliminating that part of the process, then whatever comes to the whole board should include some additional detail.
It would be probably
Yeah.
somewhere between, there would be a little less detail for, part of it is confidential when you get into personnel.
Yeah, sure, like, we don't need to see who's retiring when.
Right, so we would need to make some tweaks just to make sure that it's, you know, suitable for a public presentation. But that's already part of what we've done in the past, is any changes in FTE.
I thought that was just finance committee. Did we know that now?
I think we
Well-
saw the net changes, we just didn't necessarily see the requests at the board level.
Yeah.
So they would come, our final presentation, I think last year said they recommended 2.4 FTE addition or something. We just didn't see that 10 positions were requested and 2.4 is what they ended.
I'd like to continue seeing that if we move to this model, if that's possible.
Is there any other discussion related to the amended or the now rescinded motion?
So having not been through the process before as a new member, that presentation that is proposed here in April, that outlines, what does that generally look like? It sounds like you've got this in the past.
I would say it's a pretty high-level, district-wide presentation on revenue projections, expenditure projections. April's a little early for what we think is going to happen in terms of EAV. What we anticipate in terms of CPI, because we live in a tax-capped county. So how that's going to factor into it. But part of it has been the last year or two, technology. We weren't a one-to-one district until COVID. So now we have a lot of technology in the district. How do we plan to replace those devices as they age out? Large facility projects would be part of that. FTEs, any changes in FTE would be part of that. It's pretty high level. District, you could get into a lot of detail, and James and Eric may remember there were not too long ago 2 or 3 nights in a row where got into fine detail, which I don't know that is really necessary. That's also part of, I think, what the board's expectation has been for administration, to figure all that out and then provide more of a district level broad look at the budget, preliminary budget projections.
Yeah, I think at some point it might be helpful, and maybe it's here, maybe it's somewhere else. We have limited funds to be able to do certain things, so we're having to, we want to always say yes as much as we can, of course, but we do have to say no to things. And if there are things that and I'm not sure where it goes necessarily, but if there are things that we're having to say no to, or we have to push down the road a little bit, I think it would be good for the board to understand what those impacts are. It may not change the ability of the district to fund those things, but it'd be good for us to understand what priorities are being pushed aside, or how are we prioritizing one thing over another, not in great granular detail. That's your responsibility, I'm sure, you and your team, but just at the higher level, those areas.
I think so, but those would be suitable for public. There are probably some requests that I don't know would be suitable for public discussion. That's one thing that's been kind of delegated to administration, is making those decisions at kind of the granular level.
Sure.
Talking about some of those requests and why we didn't, or weren't able to grant those, I think we could do that.
So clarifying the original motion, which is to approve the budget calendar as proposed now. And there was a motion and a second. There was an amended motion to change the language from reduction to change. That was rescinded, right? Which led us back to more open discussion. That discussion reviewed the idea of if the board wanted to move the presentation of information that was usually done at the district committee level with 2 board members to a committee of the whole. And in doing that, this calendar, I believe, represents that. I'm not mistaken. So if we don't stand to amend it, the 2-seated board members on the district committee wouldn't attend that. We would remove those as board president. We would just say that's going to be done at the board level. But we won't outline granularity of what that would look like with this tool. Not to say we won't in the future, but not with this tool. Does that seem like the consensus so far of the board on this? Is that kind of where we landed with April? Okay. In terms of other changes, I felt like there was consensus on the change to reduction of force, legally speaking. January piece, I believe, was an item that was brought up in terms of needs. And again, while this doesn't in granular detail specify that the admin bring to the board that information, it doesn't limit the board's ability to request that information later, unless we want to get that specific now. So I would just raise that question to the board for some deliberation. Do we want to get that specific in this instrument for January related to what the administration produced for the board, if anything?
Is this are you talking about just for up until January or going forward?
Speaking more specifically to the January item that's categorized as administrative action, administration begins internal budget planning. The district begins budget planning meetings for the following fiscal year with the district leadership team. But in nowhere in that does it specify or require or ask that the board have information. Only in April does it specify presentation of preliminary financial information. So the board should be aware that if we adopt this calendar, we're more or less saying we don't expect any information unless we change our mind in January.
I would just ask that we add, instead of consider, just to make it easier, and to put it in one place. It says, consider staffing needs. Could we also just include, consider staffing, operations, and facilities needs? Because that I think would also incorporate some of the things we've been looking at, which are specifically the facilities and grounds requirements, things that we're.
Joe, why do we have the administration presents a review of facility plans?
It's a facilities
I mean,
plan.
additionally,
But I wanted to look at the needs, like kind of like a prioritization.
I was going to say, I think we should, if it's a larger expenditure, obviously, we don't need to know every, you know.
Yeah, I don't need to know about bolts.
When you say like consideration of staffing and facility needs, do you mean presented to the board? Like, do you want that information presented to the board in January, or do you just want the district administration team to internally consider that information as they prepare for April?
I would just jump in and say in January, that's when we start to get those requests. So we won't be ready in January to give, that's why we do the presentation in April, because it takes us that long to meet with everybody, have conversations, and start to prioritize so that we can be ready in April to do that presentation. So we can include again, conversation about what the requests were. But it gets to be pretty lengthy, so we would need to keep it kind of a higher level. Probably need to come to some sort of agreement or expectation clarity on at what point the board wants to have information and what point the board delegates that to an internal conversation within the district.
That seems like it would be, especially since we're changing from the district format to the board level format, that a conversation of like we would see a draft from what the admin think is pertinent, that would go out to the board in advance of that April meeting. We'd be able to then put in some, I'd say, ask or questions related to it. And if there's just a ton of disagreement, then I think we'd put it as an agenda item. Is everybody comfortable with that timeline then?
Is April going to be the easier, so would April be easier for that? Would it be better in May or even July when we're setting the facilities?
I would just say
plans?
again, April's when we've been doing it, it's current practice, it's what we're used to, and it's, I mean, there's a lot that goes into the fiscal calendar. So moving it up a couple of months seems really easy, but it moves everything else up 3 months, right? So I think we'll be ready in April, and because we've been used to that. I mean, that's current practice. I don't anticipate any difficulty being able to come with projections and being able to have a conversation about needs and requests in April. That's what we've been doing.
That works then.
I guess I'm just not sure why the calendar is trying to micromanage things that the board doesn't need to know.
Doesn't need to.
Because we don't need to know when they start something, we just need to know, here's what we want to be presented with information, whether they start figuring out staffing or fertilizer needs in November or February, as long as we're getting the report when we expect to get the report to make the decisions we need to. I don't understand the reason of having a start date on there. They probably want something like that internally for their own clock, but I don't know why that has to be part of the board calendar.
So to rephrase your question to more or less what I'm understanding is, what if we removed all administrative action from this calendar and just had it be board information and board action? Is that essentially what you're saying?
I mean, I'm sure at a high level, it's helpful for new board members just to understand what's going on in the district, but as far as like an official calendar, the other aspect of anything is when you put it in writing, now there's an expectation that somebody's being held to it. And none of us are, I don't see why we would be holding them to, did you start this last month like you said you were going to? I mean,
Right, and I certainly don't think
Yeah.
we should interpret this calendar as like an accountability mechanism only for board purposes, I think. So that raises a good question. And I mean, do you want to make an amendment to the original motion to include the removal of administrative action? And before you make that, Steve, do you have anything you think may be pertinent related to that?
You know, again, it reflects current practice. It might be helpful for members new to the board to see kind of our process, what we do, but you're right, I think one of the cautions is it opens the door to a little bit more, a little bit more.
Yeah, one, I don't want to get rid of all administrative actions because some of these are mandated by statute, the filing of the financial report, auditor's report, you know, some of these things have statutory requirements they get filed, so it's good that they're on the calendar so people are aware of that. But I think just specifically that line item in January that says, consider staffing needs, or even administration begins internal budget planning. Those are informational items that are a best guess at when admin thinks they're gonna do something, but it's not the board's responsibility, I think, to hold them to that start date or action item, as long as the deliverable is what we are holding them to in April when we get the projections.
Sounds like you're cooking up an amendment. So is there an amendment?
I
Oh,
would just
sorry.
have a quick question. So the purpose of this calendar is just for us to get an idea of where the monies are being spent, isn't it? More
Mainly
than-
with the timeline of when the budget, because the board's processes are primarily policy, adopting, amending, and monitoring budget,
Right.
approving the budget, and then evaluating the superintendent. Those are our main jobs. So the budget calendar is part of our board policy. It's a requirement that we adopt a budget calendar. But it also is tasked with keeping us accountable to ourselves in this self-imposed schedule related to the budget. That's
Related
its
to
purpose.
paying attention to it, but it shouldn't put any constraints on them other than their normal operating procedure, correct?
And that's essentially what Eric's argument was,
Okay.
removing January, if I'm not mistaken, Eric? Does that sound
Yeah,
right?
I could be convinced to eliminate them both or to combine them into one that just says administrative action. The district typically begins budget planning around this time, just so it's an informational to the board, like, hey, if you're curious when this process starts, that's when it starts.
You can even just put an administrative custom instead of administrative action, like it's their custom to start around this time. They might, they might not, you know.
Any other comments? on that?
Certainly as a new board member, it's, assuming this is the process that we followed, it's helpful for me to see it.
Right.
I don't think the intent is necessarily to hold anybody beholden to January 1st to do X, Y, and Z. Maybe there's a middle ground where there's a footnote, an asterisk or something that applies to line 6, 3, 4, whatever they may be, the ones that we don't need to hold anybody accountable to. But it's more informative for the board to understand the process. And then the ones that are important, where either they're legally required or the board wants to see something, you don't add that asterisk or some.
You know, we could put some sort of disclaimer at the top, that these are, you know, some are statutory, but I will tell you, 97, no, not 97, I take that back, 2000, 99, 2000, the state notified school districts in November that they were gonna quit paying general state aid. And they did. They quit writing checks. And if it weren't for ERA funds distributed by the federal government, school districts would not have survived. It's one of the really important reasons that school districts carry balances, because the state has done that before. So we could write some sort of disclaimer that this is best guess, this is our intention, something to that effect, but that circumstances beyond the district's control, or, you know, fluctuations in information, you know, available, I mean, something to that nature, so that something in writing, there's some flexibility and a little bit of grace, sometimes beyond our control. Again, the state just decides they're going to quit sending checks. Hope that never happens again, but lived through it once, I hope it never happens again. But we could put some sort of disclaimer at the top that, you know, that those dates are subject to change based on, you know, factors beyond the district's control, something like that. Then it just covers everything in there, because even statutory things that are in school code or in law, the state has not held itself to those requirements, which makes it hard for local school districts to do that.
All right. With the disclaimer, I would move to adopt this calendar. I think the disclaimer kind of covers, it catches everything we just discussed.
So there's a motion to amend the original motion to include a disclaimer that this is a non-binding document to administration and the board. Is there a second?
Second.
It's seconded. Any discussion related to that proposed amended motion? Seeing no discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right, the amended motion passes. I'll reread the entire motion now with the inclusion of the amendment. So we are calling for a motion to approve the district budget calendar as amended to include a disclaimer that does not bind the administration or the board to its timeline. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. All right, so we have a district budget calendar, and we all work together to amend it. That's like good for us. So, and we fulfill policy.
And the lawyer wrapped it up with the language recommendation. So that's,
So,
There you go.
disclaimer, gotta have that. All right, so then the next item on the agenda is item 9.05, student board member, as referenced in Illinois State Statute 105 ILCS 5. I'll provide a little context on this before I propose a motion. So IASB has some literature related to why include youth on your school board. Slogan, nothing about us without us. The slogan has been used by participants in causes to accentuate their need for participation in leadership decisions directly impacting their lives. At the school board level, when youth representation is intentional and supported, school boards can benefit from student members' points of view, creative thinking, inquiring natures, and open mindfulness. Some background data. Right now, state statute allows Illinois to appoint a 8th board member as ex officio, non-voting. IASB supports and endorses that, and in your board packet, you'll see that information. They give a very nice outline for the board to be able to follow. And basically, it's a, are we ready? You know, a readiness assessment before we bring in a student perspective. And then they ask the question, we've appointed our student representative to the school board, now what? And they give you a very clear outline on what that looks like. Beyond that, they also include amended policy language, which looks like the inclusion of, in policy 240, phrasing, the board will annually appoint a student board member to serve in an advisory capacity. The student member will not have any voting privileges and may not attend executive sessions of the board. So that is an optional press language. They also include all the literature that would go out to students related to the application that a student would fill out. They outline the job description, so student expectations have it, and then they outline the board's ideal responsibility related to it. It's really nice. It's all in a nice, clean packet. The proposed motion or resolution that I've got here is a motion to add a non-voting ex officio position to the Board of Education to be filled by a student for consideration by the policy committee. And so my idea would be that this intention would be referred to the policy committee for December, since it is in the purview of a policy amendment where the policy committee would review a proposed inclusion using the sample language, maybe work out adopting this supporting recommendation, determine feasibility with administration, if this is reasonable or not, and then come back to the board in the December meeting with a proposal. So that's a proposed motion. We don't have to use it. So throw that out there if there's any seconds for discussion.
More discussion. I don't think December would give enough time. The students at Spartan Senate have shared that they would like this too, but they're working on drafting a proposal to present at Spartan Senate in the near future. I'm not sure about December.
So to your point, I think that is really helpful to know. And possibly opening the door with a policy revision, I wouldn't obligate the board to immediate action, but more or less would give us the ability to do it. Because like if I stood here before you and said, hey, I'd like you to make a motion to add a student board member, and we don't include it in policy, we could add that to our list of precedent requirements for the administration. So I think reasonable would be a revision to policy and then discussion on if we want to implement it.
Well, the only thing though is the language, it looks like it says the board will annually appoint a student member.
Yeah.
There's been discussion of having multiple rotating student board members. So I'd like to see that proposal first from them so that the policy can sort of wrap around what they're looking for.
Very good point. Yep. So then,
Because
is there a second to my motion?
You repeat the motion that's on.
The motion on the table was, so we can let it die, so we can make a new motion. It was, is there a motion to add a non-voting ex officio position to the Board of Education to be filled by a student as a recommendation to the policy committee with the supporting documents?
So the motion is to make a recommendation to the policy committee to do that.
By the board with that wording.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is there a second on that motion? Or you're looking for?
I'm
something?
looking for a second. If there's no second.
I will make that motion. I will second that motion if that motion.
All right, so then it's been seconded. Is there any discussion related to that motion? And particularly to Alex's point, the binding nature of the motion?
I'm not in favor of this motion because I don't think that the students want a member. I think they want multiple members.
Would you like to propose an amendment to the motion that may be more favorable?
I would just, what do we, let me see what we've got up here.
Just make it plural.
Is there any way to just
No,
like
it's-
talk like human beings on this
No,
like
you must
instead of
speak
just like
robotically.
have to motion and do all this other stuff? I mean, like I just have like just a lot of general questions about this. Like,
Fire away.
Same here.
Hey,
I got a
so-
couple questions
Go
myself.
for it. Yeah,
So-
we're in the discussion phase, so go for
Oh,
it.
like
okay.
great idea conceptually, but then how does this work? Like, is it like we onboard a student, they're not showing up to meetings, like then what? Like, do we have all of that in place? Is that the board's responsibility? Like,
Yes.
just a,
If
a
you
lot of
read
that.
yes.
But then, do we have to agree on how this works, or is all of that, like, do we have to go through a whole policy and say, this is how we are gonna do this, or is it just already written for us?
It is already written for us.
And we have to follow that, is
You only have to follow your policy.
Yeah, policy committee would review it, come up with a proposal, and by then maybe we'll have information from,
Yeah, first I'd like to hear
Student
information
Senate.
from Mr. Swanson, because he's currently working with students to craft a proposal.
So I guess it's my understanding that the motion is just that the policy committee, which you lead, is being tasked with coming back with a recommendation to the board as to how we implement a student board member. Correct.
No
So
deadline.
we're not telling you how to do
I don't want the December
it.
deadline, and I don't want the A student, is the problem.
It would, the original motion specified a December item on, it being an item on the December agenda. So if you wanted amended to not be December, then this would be the
I
time.
just want a motion to have the policy committee discuss a student board
That is
representative.
that's-
Or
Second.
discuss the concept of
Seconded.
student board
Any discussion on that?
representation.
yes, I agree with you.
Yes,
Perfect.
yes. And then we do have to consider our responsibilities, because there's a whole list of them. I was reading it, which is fine, but I just think we can't jump into it without talking about, you know, who's gonna play this role and that role, or perhaps it'll be Alex, because he's connected with the student senate. I just think we need to keep that in mind, along with everything else.
Yeah, I just, personally, I think that there would need to be a lot of revisions to this press sample template. And I think we'd be better just following Mr. Swanson's recommendation.
Can we invite him to come to the December
That's what I
meeting?
was, yeah, that sounds like an excellent idea. But I don't know if he'll be ready by December. I would leave it up to when he's ready.
And we can always table.
No.
I also don't have this thing memorized, but is there no age on this? So like, why are we excluding a middle schooler being out here?
Yeah, the,
It just says it must be a
Application.
full-time student. in
Like, 'cause it's harder for them to get driven to the meetings and back. I don't know.
Good
You-
idea.
and
I'm just asking. Like,
Right, no, it's a
that's
good
all the
question.
questions
Right,
that I
right.
think really need to be hammered out in the midst of this, and if that's the policy committee that's gonna do that, that's,
only
That's
if
great.
you guys want it to be policy.
Yeah.
So that's fine. 'Cause the amended motion is now to just say policy committee will have it. So rather than giving a specific date. So is there any other discussion on that?
I motion to wait until we hear back from Alex. I mean, it's probably too long a motion. Wait for Alex to hear from Mr. Swanson.
I
Motion
think we should just
to-
table this.
Table, okay. I motion to table it until we hear from Mr. Swanson.
How's this? We got a lot of motions and seconds and
Yeah, we got
amendments
a
and
lot of
everybody's
stuff
really
on the table.
confused. So we're just gonna go ahead and take a step back.
Okay.
Give me your general consensus here. Do you guys want this to be referred to the policy committee, or do you guys want to wait and talk about this as a committee of the whole later?
Maybe it'd be more helpful to ask how people generally feel about having a student board member, and then we can ask about how we want to move forward, making changes necessary to support that.
Sounds good to me. Open
I'd like
any
to hear the
discussion.
proposal. I'd like to hear the proposal when Mr. Swanson is ready.
I don't know how I'd feel till I see the proposal.
Mr. Swanson, so Mr. Swanson, not this proposal, Mr. Swanson proposal.
Right.
Yes.
Gotcha.
So my general sentiment, I'm open to the idea. I like the idea of having a student or students, depending on how we decide to participate. I think there's a general framework here that's great, but I do think it'd be great to get, I don't know, Mr. Swanson's input or the Spartan Senate's input on how they think they might implement it, and how they might participate and add to the board.
Oh, and just, Mr. Swanson is the principal of the high school.
I thought it was, I
Okay,
know
yeah,
that, but I thought
okay,
there was
okay.
another one. My-
No,
my-
just to
my
be sure,
apologies.
just to make sure we're all on the same page. Yes.
I would echo Alan's sentiments. Finally supporting it, open to recommendations from the policy committee as to how we do that.
Recommendations from the policy committee.
I'm fine with taking it to the policy committee with recommendations.
Got it.
That sounds fine.
Perfect.
Could Mr. Swanson be a guest at the policy committee?
What's your policy committee, Alex? You can have whatever you want.
Okay.
So.
Then we don't need a motion.
Well, I'm gonna say
Or
at this
do
point,
we?
the consensus I have here is a motion to refer this item to the policy committee. Is there a second?
Second.
Great. Is there any additional discussion?
No.
No? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, we're referring to the policy committee.
Put it on the policy committee agenda.
I will.
Thank you, Alex.
Thank
All right, so the last item on the agenda is the election for board officer vacancy, item 9.06. So, tonight, we will hold a special election to fill the position of Vice President of the Board of Education. This process will be conducted in accordance with our district policies, parliamentary procedure as outlined by Robert's Rules of Order and the Illinois Open Meetings Act. The process for tonight's election is as follows. Nominations. I will open the floor for nominations for the position of Vice President. Any board member may nominate themselves or another member. No second is required for a nomination, but the nominee must accept or decline the nomination before proceeding. Nominations will be recorded in the order they are received, and this order will determine the sequence for speeches and voting. Nominee speeches. After nominations are closed, each nominee will have the opportunity to deliver a brief statement of up to 2 minutes as a chance for nominees to share why they believe they are the best candidate for the position. Nominees will speak in the order in which they are nominated. Voting. After deliberation concludes, we will proceed to voting. Kelly will call on each board member to cast their vote publicly in the order in which the nominees were presented, ensuring transparency and compliance with the Open Meetings Act. The majority of the votes cast is required to elect the vice president. If no majority is achieved in the first round, the candidate with the fewest votes will be removed, and we will proceed with additional rounds until majority is reached. In the event of a tie or a deadlock, the board president will cast a vote to ensure that the election process is resolved efficiently and fairly. Once a majority is achieved, I will announce the newly elected vice president, who will assume their duties immediately. This election is a vital part in maintaining our board's functionality and ensuring we can continue to serve our students, staff, and community effectively, and I want to thank each and every one of you for your thoughtful participation in the process. At this time, I now open the floor for nominations for the position of vice president.
I'd like to nominate Mr. Koppel.
Are there any other nominations?
I'd like to nominate Eric Jones.
Are there any other nominations? 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 Seeing no further nominations, in the order of nomination, we'll allow 2 minutes for Mr. Koppel, if he so chooses, to give a brief reason why he thinks he'd be a great candidate for vice president.
I accept the nomination, thank you. Thank you for serving with me on this board. It's been a pleasure being here for a year and a half now. I was appointed by all of you except for Mr. Zantu, and I will bring with me my legal expertise, my understanding of the school code, and my desire to continue expanding upon and working with our policies, working with staff, and making sure that with the administration, continuing to give the people of Sycamore the best bang for their buck, their taxpayer dollars, to make sure that we're good stewards of these funds that we receive, and make sure that the students and the teachers are being supported in our community. That's what I set out to do when I started on this board, and I think that the goals that we've been working toward together, we've been working, striding toward very well. I think through the policy committee, we've been making some incredible strides, and I think we can continue to see that moving forward. As the vice president, I know the policies and procedures, I know Robert's rules. I would be able to run a clean meeting. Haven't had to do that yet, but Mr. DeVito, he stepped in the shoes of Mr. Downbeck very well and took over, and I think he's running a very good meeting. He's doing so very well, so I would continue to try and do that in his absence if I ever had to step up. Like all of you, I love Sycamore, and I just want to see the best thing for our community and for our board.
Thank you, Christian. Eric, would you like to accept the nomination?
I do accept the nomination. Thank you for that. I've had the pleasure of serving as a board member for almost 12 years, primarily as just a standard board member under the long-running leadership of the late Jim Downbeck and Steve Nelson, and most recently as your secretary. As the opportunity for change in leadership arose during the last election, I opted not to run for an upper office position against Jim based on his preference to remain in that position for the last term, and Michael's preference to take on a leadership role of his own. While I haven't served in a presidential or vice presidential role on this board, I have served in those roles in other local clubs and organizations. With the new vacancy in the vice president role, I humbly accept your nomination to assist Michael in the transformational changes that are underway. Michael and I have a shared vision of the direction the board is moving in, a long working history at various leadership levels and other volunteer organizations, and I believe that my tenure on the board lends a significant level of trust between the board and administration that will help with many of the potentially disruptive changes the board is currently seeking. As an additional reflection of my intention to fulfill this role, I recently spent the majority of my time at the III conference attending sessions focused on board leadership. In short, I believe my working experience with Michael, my history with the administration, and my long tenure on the board will help position me as an ideal candidate for vice president for the relatively short 6 months left in the current term to make as much progress as we can in a successful and harmonious manner, and I thank you for your consideration.
At this time, we will proceed to voting, in which case Kelly will call on each board member to cast their vote publicly in the order in which the nominees were presented. What will happen is this will be a roll call vote. And if no majority is achieved in the first round, the candidate with the fewest votes will be removed. We'll proceed with additional rounds, and in the event of a tie or deadlock, the board president will cast a vote to ensure that the election process is resolved. At this time, since Christian was nominated first, Kelly, would you please call the roll? And as your name is called, please indicate yea or nay.
Kratos?
Yay.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Yes.
Okay, thank
Yay.
you. Jones?
Nay.
Zantu?
Nay.
Shiloh?
Nay.
Poppel?
Yay.
Evans?
Nay.
At this time, Eric Jones is elected Vice President of the Board of Education. Thank you.
Okay.
Yep, you can clap. Sorry. So, tension with the knife here. All right. Okay. So, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is to make a motion to go into executive session related to litigation when an action, I'm sorry, I'll reread the motion. Oh,
Are you
yes.
Pull up on that.
Yeah, let's hold off on the secretary.
Totally your call.
Yeah, just so we can put it as an agenda.
so.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
That's secretary.
Okay. We'd have to host, so we need to host another special election for the secretary since Eric is the current secretary. Eric hasn't tendered his resignation yet for the secretary, but he has been elected as vice president. So this is an incompatibility of roles. Given there's no precedent on this, I'm gonna wing it. And so Eric, would you like to
great.
resign from the secretary role?
I tender my resignation.
He's tendered his resignation. Okay, so at this point in time, we do have signatures that we need from the secretary, but it's not on the agenda. And so I don't want to take deliberative action on something that's not on the agenda. So I'm going to say, how sensitive are these documents? Do they need it?
It doesn't.
Could we just seek the change?
Yeah,
in-
it didn't say vice president, it just said board member vacancy. So it's
Oh.
not specific to vice president.
True, okay.
I think you could.
Yep. All right, well,
But Nicole will cover.
Can we nominate?
all right, let's do it. Let's host another special election. So if you wanted to be secretary, now's your
What a
chance.
night. What a night.
What a night. All right, so tonight we're going to hold a special election. It's going to have the same rules.
Okay.
So if you want me to, if anyone here wants me to repeat them, please let me know.
That's okay.
Okay. Is there any, I guess I'll call out at this time, I'll open the floor for nominations for the position
I
of
nominate
secretary.
Christian Koppel.
From the
Second.
I accept this nomination.
Are there any other nominations?
Don't you want to give a speech?
Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? No. Seeing no additional nominations, Christian, you are the new secretary of the board. Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right. And you're gonna need to tell me how we did on Robert's rules. I'm a little nervous. All right, so at this point in
Robert's not
time.
here tonight.
Yeah, secretary, thank you guys.
Yeah. Nice catch,
Um,
Kelly.
We'll go ahead and I'll host a motion that the Board of Education adjourn to executive session for the consideration of matters related to litigation when an action against, affecting, or on behalf of a particular body has been filed and is pending before a court or administrative tribunal, or when the public finds that an action is probable or imminent, in which case the basis for the finding shall be recorded and entered into the minutes of the closed meeting session. There's one other exemption because we made the FOIA change, so if you'll just give me one moment to include that exemption. It's exemption 9, so I can read it. Yeah, where's the bookmark? I need it. And security procedures, school building safety, and security and use of personnel and equipment to respond to an actual, a threatened, or a reasonably potential danger to the safety of employees, students, staff, the public, or public property. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
All right.
I appreciate it.
unspecified
I'm a
amount of
pecan, I
time.
don't say pecan.
But I felt like yeah, it could be.
Saw your typing die off there at the end.
So,
I'll
make sure it's a nice summary. Doesn't need to be verbatim. That's why I got these.
We're back in open session. I'm going to call for a motion to adjourn. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Stand adjourned.
Thank you. Change of process.
Happy Thanksgiving, everybody.
Yeah, you
Enjoy your
Yes, happy Thanksgiving.
time with